Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining tonight's speaker series presentation. My name is Makoto Kotani, and I am the Director of Programs at Cato. We are excited to present tonight's speaker series titled Virtue and Valor, Nisei Veteran Stories Through the Generations, and we will be welcoming a diverse intergenerational panel and hearing discussion from our panel on the legacy and impact of the Nisei veterans. We are proud to be presenting this program in partnership with Go for Broke National Education Center. And for this event, it's free to the community and it's made possible by Cato along with support from the Aratani Foundation. You'll see a list of panelists that we have on the screen. And before I go ahead and share the different panelists and do the introduction for them, I do want to give some background on Cato as an organization. Founded in 1961, Cato is a mission-driven organization, and we are engaged in improving the quality of life for older adults and their caregivers in the Japanese American and Japanese communities. Our mission is to enhance the quality of senior life in our community. I do also want to share about our Iyashi Care program that we have. This is in partnership with Providence, and this is a free consultation palliative care program that is offered to the community and is an extremely valuable resource that our community's older adults and their family members can rely on even during the pandemic. If you have any questions, if you're interested in getting more information about this program, please visit the Iyashi Care page on our website to view an assessment that you can take to see if this program can benefit you or a loved one. Tonight, we are partnering with Go for Broke National Education Center to present the panel. And at Go for Broke, they educate the public on the valor of the Japanese American veterans of World War II and their contributions to our nation. Their goal is to inspire new generations to embody the Japanese American veterans' core values of courage, sacrifice, equality, humility, and patriotism. Founded in 1989, Go for Broke National Education Center maintains the Go for Broke Monument and the interactive Defining Courage exhibition in downtown LA, as well as extensive oral histories and archives, education and training programs, and other initiatives. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Cato's President and CEO, Gene Kanamori. He's also a panelist for tonight's discussion. So Gene, thank you for joining me in helping introduce our moderator for tonight, Go for Broke National Education Center's President, Mitch Maki.
Thank you very much, Makoto. Appreciate it. First of all, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you carving out some time to be with us on this very interesting panel. We have, again, an intergenerational panel. It's going to be very interesting. Now I'd like to introduce to you our moderator. He's President and CEO of Go for Broke National Education Center, but more importantly, he's a good friend of mine too. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Mitch Maki.
Gene, thanks, Gene. So happy to be here. And before we begin, I really just want to thank Keiro and our friends at Aratani Foundation for sponsoring this speaker series, and in particular, this speaker series tonight, as we've gotten together with a really cool panel to discuss what we're going to talk about. And for our audience, we at Go for Broke, our work is to maintain the legacy of the Japanese American veterans of World War II. So we do a lot of work in telling the stories of the battles, telling the stories of the courage and the sacrifice and the obligation that these veterans demonstrated to each other. But tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. Tonight we're going to be talking about what their legacy means to us as Japanese Americans, what their legacy means to us as individuals. And we've assembled a panel of 4 different people, different ages, different generations, different genders, and having them share what the legacy of the Nisei veterans has meant to them as they formed their identities. So with no further ado, let me just jump in to the panel and begin to introduce them all to you. And our first panelist is somebody who really needs no introduction at all, certainly in this audience, but certainly not in Little Tokyo. And that's our good friend, Gene Kanamori. And as many of you know, Gene is the executive director of Keiro. He's a sansei. He's in his mid-60s, but he is also really one of the go-to people in Little Tokyo. Many of us go to him, to Gene, for his guidance and for his advice as we navigate the challenges of running nonprofit organizations in Little Tokyo. So I'm so excited to have Gene on our panel tonight. The second person is also somebody who in the Little Tokyo community really needs no introduction, and that, of course, is Helen Ota. So Helen, can you unmute yourself and join us? And Helen currently her title is Administrative Guru at Smooch Unplugged LLC, which is an executive search firm. But the reason Helen is joining us tonight is, as you can see, she is a woman and she is in her mid-50s. She gave me permission to say that. And also, she is half Shin Nikkei or Shin Nisei and also Sansei. So we're very excited to hear about her perspectives on how the veterans helped to shape her identity. Our third panelist is an actor, somebody who I think many of us have seen on the screen and on TV, and that's Derek Mio. And some of you may know Derek from his work in The Terror from a couple of years ago. He also had the fortune to play Hershey Miyamura and played that role very well. And some of you may know him most recently from his Audi commercial in The Haunted House. And so I want to welcome Derek. Derek is a Yonsei and is in his mid-30s. And last but not least is Lindsay Sugimoto. And Lindsay is, as you can see, a woman. She's also Yonsei, and she is in her late 20s and is an attorney for Latham and Watkins. And I'll also mention that Lindsay is very involved with us at Go for Broken, is in a group that we call the Torchbearers. And so we're going to hear about that in a little bit. But welcome to all four of you. So excited to have you here. Let's jump right into it. Gene, we'll start with you. And, you know, this idea of having this panel came from you, and you talked about how important the veterans were to shaping your identity as a young boy, as a young man growing up in the 60s and 70s. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mitch. I really appreciate you asking that question because, you know, growing up in the 60s and, you know, there wasn't any heroes around, especially Japanese American heroes. You know, there was none in the history books. The teachers, it wasn't in the curriculum either, right? Even if you go through like sports, there was no Asian Pacific Islander people that we could even look up to. You know, it wasn't until like in high school where my dad came home one day and he was golfing. He was in this Nisei Week golf club. And he said, "Hey, Gene, you know, I just played golf with Ben Kuroki." I said, "Oh, great." So I asked him, "Who's Ben Kuroki?" Right? So he started talking about his missions, you know, over 50 missions. He flew during World War II. But then he started talking a little bit about the 442nd, 100th, and MIS too. And that, Mitch, started me. I started to hang my hat on, I do have heroes. I do have people I can be proud of. And you know what? They're from my community too.
When did you first realize the significance of that story, of what these Japanese American men did during World War II? And later on, we learned that there were Japanese American women too. When did you first really begin to grasp that?
Unfortunately, it was in high school. It was that late. I was, what, 16 years old when I heard the full story of the 442nd, 100th, and MIS too. So it was late in the game, Mitch, for me. And I didn't, because no one told me about it. You know, my parents didn't talk to me about it. School didn't educate me about it. So it was almost by accident that I learned about that story. And what a story I learned, right? So the next couple of 2-3 years and throughout my college years, I actually studied a lot about the World War II experience.
Yeah, you know, and I'm assuming your experience may have been somewhat similar to mine. I remember learning about the camps when I was about 10 years old. And, you know, I didn't have family that was in the camps because my folks were from Hawaii. But I remember thinking, this couldn't be Japanese Americans like us. It had to be like Japanese from Japan or something. And then to my horror, I realized, no, it was Japanese Americans like us that were sent off to camp. But at the same time, I learned about the Nisei veterans. And to my surprise and to my pride, really, I learned that these were men like my father. These were men that I could grow up to emulate because they were Japanese Americans like us, and they went on to become the most highly decorated unit in American military history. So on one hand, I couldn't believe that they would do that to us, but on the other hand, I was so proud of what these men had done for all of us. Helen, when did you first learn about the Japanese American veteran experience?
I actually did not learn about it until after high school. Because of my background, my family was actually in Japan during World War II. So I wasn't really exposed to that story. And in high school, I remember hearing something about the Japanese American soldiers, but really didn't know anything until much, much later. In fact, just before I joined Go for Broke back in 2001. And that's when, boy, talk about intensive learning. I got some great education. I got a great education from the voices directly from those men and really hearing their stories, learned so much. And their experiences really helped shape who I am today. I mean, many experiences I've gone through, but definitely working at Go for Broke and being amongst the 100th 442 MIS on a daily basis definitely influenced me.
Can you share an example of how you were influenced by a veteran?
Sure. I mean, it's going to be hard to pinpoint just one thing. But if I could generalize, obviously they had that Go for Broke spirit, like they gave it their all. And even outside of that experience during the war, it showed in every time I worked with them. And that was passed on to me. And a lot of the work that I do in the community, my volunteer work, is based on making sure I give it my all, that I go for broke, that I, make that commitment and, do my best for the good of the community. And I can't, I'm so thankful for that experience with them because it really shaped how I work in the community.
It's funny how the term Go for Broke has gotten into the American vernacular, and you hear people say it and they just mean it as a sports term or maybe a gambling term or whatever. And yet I know for me, it has such deeper meaning than, oh, let's just, go in there and, all in kind of thing. But it really talks about almost a spiritual kind of connection with other people.
Most definitely. I mean, I think we have to stop and think about really how deep and how many layers are really within that saying alone. It's not like you just said, it's not just a surface Go for Broke. There's so much history behind that statement, and it carries a lot of weight emotionally, historically. We have to remember that because we don't want, that's a legacy that we want to remember, but also emulate.
So Derek, how about you? Same question. When did you first really realize what the Nisei veterans accomplished? And again, you're one generation removed. You're more than Helen or Jean. You're Yonsei.
Yes. Well, Mitch, as you know, one of my grandfathers, Stanley Kaizawa, served in the MIS. But when you're growing up, when you're a kid, you hear certain stories about your grandparents' generation, and it doesn't really stick with you what exactly they had to go through or experience in it. And it's not till later on when if you happen to pursue acting and maybe you are researching for.
Oh, can you say something, Derek, or are we losing you? Oh, we can't hear you right now. So let's see if no, can't hear you still. So let's see if we give that a second to clear up. Go ahead and try it again. Okay, why don't we have you log off and log back on, and when you come back on, Kent, if we can make sure Derek gets back in, and we'll have him finish his talk about how he began to really embrace his grandparents' experience. So Lindsay, let's move on to you then. And Lindsay's the farthest removed from all of us, even though she is Yonsei. Tell us when you first heard about this story, and then when it first started to sink in for you.
So I was fortunate enough to grow up with the story. My grandparents and my grandpa specifically was really involved in Go for Broke. He was in the MIS. And I grew up going to the Go for Broke offices for like lunches and evening of Aloha every year. But I guess the story didn't really sink in for me until I was in college. Growing up, I grew up in a pretty white area and always wanted to be white. And I like knew I was American, but I wanted it to show on the outside. And I was in a sorority in college, about 250 girls, and I was one of a few people of color. My mom was not happy about that one, but I remember it was a party, and the party was themed America. And we were about to go to the party, and one of my friends who was white, she asked another friend of ours at the table, or she asked me, sorry, who do you think is more American? She pointed to herself and then my other friend who was also white. And I remember getting so, at first I got so upset and hurt that because of what I look like, my Asian attributes, to them, I wasn't considered an American. But then I felt this like feeling of kind of liberation. And I remember saying to them like, well, when did your family come to the United States? Okay, 1950s, cool, because mine came in the early 1900s. When, like, did your grandpa fight for the US? And both of them shook their heads no. And at that moment, I realized, you know, there's nothing more I would want to be than being Japanese American, because I was so proud of my grandpa and, you know, the other Japanese American veterans that fought for this country in a time when, you know, they saw them as the alien. And that, I guess that's when I realized and really became proud to be a Japanese American and really be proud of the Nisei veteran legacy.
You know, I've heard you tell that story several times, many times actually, and every time I hear it, I start to tear up because I think that is just such a beautiful story. And from what you've told me, the story gets even better, because what was the response of your two white sorority sisters when you kind of told them, hey, I think I look more American than you guys?
So I put them through a 3-hour lecture. And these are some of my closest friends to date. They sat there and took everything in and really can tell you now about these different JA organizations like Go for Broke and Nisei Week. And so that made me, you know, feel so happy, but also realize how important Go for Broke is in being able to share that legacy of the Nisei veterans so that we can remind people that, you know, American heroes come in all different shapes, sizes, races, genders, and ethnicities.
Yeah, that's the part of the story that I love so much, is that the legacy of your grandfather continues, and it doesn't only shape your identity as a JA, but your white sorority sisters also took it in. Your white sorority sisters now have a different understanding of what it means to be American. So I think that's really cool. Derek, can we hear you now?
My apologies about that.
Okay, you're good. So
am I good now?
Okay, I loved where you were going. You're saying, you know, when you heard about your grandparents, you know, you're a little kid, you don't really take it all in. So go from there.
Yes. So it's not until I got older that you start learning more. Fortunately for me, I've had the opportunity to portray some of our Nisei veterans. So not only have they literally provided opportunities for me. When I think about, I mean, even for me, my grandfather Stanley, who was in the MIS, his assignment in Japan, he went after the war was finished actually, but part of his assignment during the occupation was monitoring kabuki theater and some of the arts that were the culture that was going on in Japan, and making sure that there was no hidden messages in the kabuki scripts. So he was kind of a script reader before I even, was alive and existed in the entertainment industry. And he really fell in love with kabuki. And I remember as a small child, he would try to emulate the kabuki faces, do the kabuki, how they do it, and like entertain me and my brother. And so, at a young age, he was kind of a ham, and my mother is for sure, and very theatrical as well. So I think that side of me kind of got passed down. But in terms of what's crazy, I was just thinking of it when everyone else was answering. The way I even got into the entertainment business is a direct result of my grandpa Stanley and one of his MIS what do you call it, friends from the MIS, because his friend from Hawaii, his son graduated from USC Film School, and he's the one that actually encouraged me to apply to USC for film. So it comes full circle, and then I get to have this opportunity a couple of years ago to be the lead in a TV series, and I get to portray an MIS soldier. So it's hard to wrap my head around and quantify like how, the Nisei and my grandfather specifically has had an impact on me and who I am.
Yeah. Derek, I think in your next commercial or your next gig, you need to make that kabuki face and have that be part of write that into the contract. But let me ask you and Jean a specific question, which is that, in our American society, Asian men are emasculated so often. We're not portrayed as being the leading studs. We're not portrayed as being the biggest, baddest dudes, and that affects how we see ourselves as males in America. How would you say the Nisei veterans affected that part of how you see yourself?
If let me take that one, Mitch. If anyone has ever met the veterans of Go for Broke and any veterans of World War II, they are the greatest people you ever want to meet. One of the things I did some work for Go for Broke about 20 years ago, and Helen probably remember this, and I got to meet quite a few of those folks. And I tell it, Tetsu Sato, Kinokune, James Murata. And when I address them, I used to say, Mr. Asato, Mr. Akune, Mr. Murata. And they just get so mad at me. Don't call me Mr. Don't do that, right? So I had to sit down and talk. I had a talk with all of them saying that, listen, you're my hero. There's no one else that I can look up to as far as the things that you did to defend us, to protect us, to give us freedoms and protect democracy. I said, dude, I'm going to call you Mr., right? Because you deserve that. And I'm not going to call you by your first name. I'm going to call you Mr. because that's how much you mean to me. And so even at that older age, they impacted me so much to see these men that sacrificed so much, during that time to protect us and give us a story like that. What was totally amazing. And I like to add, I met their wives too. and they are just, the significant others were just fantastic. I fell in love with them too. And it was just a wonderful experience for me. And I really appreciated that.
Yeah, for me, Mitch, I'd say, I think that's why a part of me wanted to pursue this very kind of difficult, challenging business of not always having job security. Is a part of me did want to see that narrative change after seeing what had been being put out, in movies and TV that you grow up on. A lot of my favorite actors, they're not Asian. It's these other men that had very kind of masculine roles, and you kind of envision yourself in one of those kind of roles. And so I guess that's kind of why I've stuck it out and gone for broke in this business, and wasn't satisfied until I got something like The Terror, where I got to be a romantic lead. And so it really was satisfying to the point, where I wasn't sure if I'd be able to top it or find something as satisfying as that role, but definitely the topic of Asian masculinity, I think that's something that because I played the other side too. I played the nerd or the masculine man, but you always want to get those other ones, and you tell yourself you want to develop those kind of projects for yourself.
Yeah,
which is still a goal.
So I mean, it's interesting that even though Gene is a couple years older than you, as men, we can really identify again how the legacy of the Nisei veterans affects how we as males in this society, view ourselves, view our role, view our potential. And that's something that I agree with you, Gene. They're forever going to be Mr. in my mind too, And, Helen, you got a chance to work with veterans on a day-to-day basis, working at Go for Broke. And I know I've just fallen in love with my job and fallen in love with them. And I mean this in the most positive way, that the thing that I find so fascinating and so exhilarating is that they're ordinary men. And when I mean that in the sense that they're just down-to-earth guys that did something extraordinary, but
Yeah.
in their heart, they're ordinary guys, like my dad, like, my uncle would be, kind of thing. How would you describe the Nisei veterans that you've encountered?
Oh, it's like anything. Everybody comes from all walks of life. And I've had the honor and privilege of getting to know Lindsay's grandpa and grandmother too. Seeing them all the time on a regular basis. I will always cherish your grandmother's cream puffs, her baked goods. But they were so supportive of everything at Go for Broke. And even as an individual for me, they always supported me in some way. And I'm so thankful for that. And I think, working there day to day, what I realized is I was so fortunate because I got to hear their stories, not just of what they faced on the battlefield, but of their ordinary lives, and I say that in quotes because I think they're more than ordinary to me. But that has really allowed me to understand that we all have a responsibility to really understand the perspectives of individuals, no matter what background they're coming from. And you can't just say, just because they're JA, they're all going to be like this, and that their story is this, that their story is affiliated with camp or anything like that. I was thinking of, and I hope that Ken Akuna is okay that I share this with everybody here. I mean, I'm sure he shared the story, but one thing I remember was here he was fighting in the war or served in the MIS, but he also had siblings, I believe it was, in Japan. So the thought of possibly fighting against each other in this war, that like just really opened my eyes, because it made me realize that everyone's stories and their perspectives have so much value to the bigger story. And so I realized that I have to remember that whenever I interact with somebody or interact with a group, there's so many stories to be aware of and to get to know and connect. And I really learned that through working at Go for Broke, because these men are not just, courageous men. They talked about fear. They talked about, wanting to be with their family, everything under the gamut. And gosh, I treasure that so much. And again, I take that with me in everything that I do.
Helen, that was so beautiful. And you mentioned Ken Akune, Mr. Akune, to Jean and to all of us. I mean, we love Ken. And you tell that story about how he had a brother that was in the Japanese army and how that weighed heavily on him. What would he do if he had to come face to face with his brother and so forth? So yeah, it's those powerful, heart-wrenching stories. But let me tell you a story about Ken that is the complete opposite, because Ken was in the MIS and he was involved with writing some of the propaganda statements that they would drop the leaflets from the airplanes onto the Japanese soldiers below. And one day, Ken was interrogating a Japanese POW, and the guy had one of his leaflets in his pocket. He had saved the propaganda leaflet that Ken had composed. And Ken, feeling very good about this, had to ask him, so, hey, I see you kept the propaganda leaflet. Why was that? And he was expecting the POW to say, oh, it was so beautifully written, or it spoke the truth, or, it convinced me that the war was wrong. And the Japanese POW just looked at him and said, in the jungle, we don't always have toilet paper, so we keep whatever we could keep.
I remember that story. And those are like the golden stories for me too, because again, it shows how human, all of these men were. We think of them as heroes. Of course they're heroes, but they're human beings that, obviously, I mean, that was probably one of the most fun stories to hear from Ken.
Yeah.
And I can hear him laughing right now in my ear, and I'm gonna have to give him a call after this to say hi.
And every veteran has those stories, right?
Right.
Lindsay, you just came back to Go for Broke less than a year ago. You had sent out the word to me that, hey, I want to get involved with Go for Broke. I want to be a part of the torchbearers, and you have just jumped in with both feet and, being on the panel today. But here you are. I look at you, you're an up-and-coming attorney. You work crazy hours. You're so successful. The world is your oyster, and yet you choose to come back to your roots. You come back to an organization that honors your grandfather. Talk about that. What's going on there?
Yes, I do work crazy hours. I don't know about successful or up and coming, but it was just an easy decision for me. I mean, I look at where I am today, and I know it's so cliche. People say this all the time. I am where I am because of the people before me. Okage Samade. And to me, that really sticks. One, like, I'm taking this video call in my grandparents' home, and I have a place, I have a roof over my head because of what they provided for me. I went to law school because my grandma, my hero, she was a firecracker, and she she went to Berkeley, couldn't finish school because of life circumstances, including the war, and ended up being a legal secretary for a pretty prominent firm. But to me, the next step for my generation, I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to make sure that I took what my grandparents and my parents gave to me and sacrificed, and really put that to to a positive result. And so Go for Broke, coming back to Go for Broke was so important to me because I know that there's a lot of people out there that weren't as fortunate as me to know that their grandparents' story, or the Yonsei generation who doesn't get to hear the veteran story firsthand. And so for my generation and the ones that are coming, it's really important to keep sharing that and to keep kind of like providing people an opportunity to figure out what their Japanese American identity means to them, because it's helped me so much in my life.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that, Mitch. I mean, the younger generations, we don't really realize, what kind of opportunities that we've had, but it's only because, everyone that came before us, our parents, and of course that started with the greatest generation, the men and women of that era who had to sacrifice and face all that prejudice and overcome and gaman, and succeed and become really successful in their lives and pass those principles down to our parents. And so I totally agree with what Lindsay said is yeah, that's had a direct impact on the opportunities that we've all been able to have.
And I can say, Derek and Lindsay, for old dudes like Gene and I, yeah, and I'll put you in that category, Gene. Yes, I will. But
That's good.
To hear you two talk about your reverence and your appreciation for what you have today and how that is the result of the Nisei veterans, that just warms my heart. Derek, if I were to ask you, what one thing did the Nisei veterans give to you? What lesson, what value, what perspective? Just one. What would you say?
I think there was at that time such a desire to prove your loyalty, to prove that you are an American to the point where you're going to go to war against your own family members. I think it's because they and we love this country and we love the freedoms that we have and the opportunities that we have to pursue our American dreams. And I know that both of my grandfathers did after the war. They pursued their passions. And that's what I took from my grandfathers. One of my grandfathers, Grandpa Mio, they went to Manzanar. Afterwards, he became a successful fisherman. He was a tuna fishing boat captain. He really loved fishing, and Ellis Nonizuka went on his boat, and everyone who fished at that time wanted to go on his boat because he always found fish. My other grandfather, Stanley Kaizawa, he from the MIS loved kabuki and dramas and passed that down to me. So I think I saw both of them really embrace the idea of that American dream. And so I think that's why I, chose to go this path and said, I have to.
So pursuing your passion or pursuing their passion is the gift or the lesson that they've given to you.
I think it's seizing the opportunities, that opportunity that they fought and died for their the younger generations to have as well.
Wow. We have one of our torchbearers, Emiko Krantz, and she just said it so beautifully one day. She said, the legacy of the Nisei veterans is they fought for the future of those that they loved and those that they would never know. And it's so poetic that it's so true that your grandfathers fought for you and for those people in your family, but also for the generations that they would never know, to have that ability to pursue their passions. Helen,
I
what
totally
about
agree,
you?
yeah.
What was the one thing that you would say the veterans gave to you?
It's so hard to say just the one thing because there's so many, like I said. You know, I would say, you know, I think most of us have grown up with this thing of don't bring shame to the family. um, for some reason that kind of sticks out, and then really carrying yourself, you know, really having, what is it? Carrying yourself with dignity. Like anything that you approach, it's like when you do it, you got to think about who came. It's sort of what Lindsay and Derek were just saying, what we all have been saying. It's like you have to think about the people who came before you, sort of the path that they sort of paved for you. You're going to walk down that path. Don't bring shame, and you better bring your, you know, with dignity, you walk down that path so that the folks behind you can walk down that path as well and further beyond that. And I think it's sort of just building upon that. But yeah.
You know, what Derek said about pursuing one's passion, and then what you're saying about don't bring shame to the family, walk with dignity. I mean, I think those are two big values that they gave to us, you know. How about you, Gene?
Yeah, for me, Mitch, it's really a pride. That's what they gave me. They gave me pride to point to something to, again, to hang my hat on, that we as a community, as Japanese Americans, through the toughest challenges, right? I mean, the toughest challenges to go out there and again create this. To me, it's almost mythical, you know, unit that fought bravely for our country. So, you know, it's one of those things that, again, as every one of us has talked about, they're just ordinary people. They're just, and they're so young too. That's another thing. There's such young men, but they went out there and became the best soldiers they could possibly be. Again, with a lot of pride. And with those actions, you know, we benefited, right? Our generations benefited, because I don't know how many times in tough situations we bring up the 442nd 100 MIS, right? That's something that we carry all the time. Wait a second, don't talk to us like that. This is what we did, right?
Did your grandfather fight for the for the country, right, Lindsay? Yeah.
So really, Mitch, it's pride, you know, that they give it.
And you know, you used the word mythical, and I was talking to General David Bramlett, 4-star retired general in Hawaii, and he's actually, and I'm going to put a plug in for our History Channel documentary, which is coming out in 2 days. But in that documentary, he says it's the stuff of movies. You know, that what they did, you can't write a better script, you know, and yet it's reality. And the other thing that you said, Gene, that is just mind-blowing for me is how young they were. You know, 21, 22 years old. I mean, look at Derek. You know, Derek would be an old geezer compared to these guys, right? You know, that they were like, you know, young men who didn't have families. You know, we're going to receive a long-term loan of Joe Hayashi's Medal of Honor. And Joe left to go fight in the war when he was like 23. He had never had a girlfriend. He didn't get a chance to become a father. He didn't get a chance to come back and get married and live a long life and have children and have grandchildren. And what they sacrificed, you know, it brings it home that they sacrificed the human things that we all value in our day-to-day life. Lindsay, what about you? If I were to ask you, what's the one thing, what's the one value that you really walk away with?
Oh, I feel like everybody had really good answers, so I don't want to repeat them. I think I would say love, and this is let me explain.
Yeah.
So I guess so love for this country, you know, when they were seen as the enemy, love for the enemy in the sense that they, you know, they were fighting against their loved ones who might be in Japan, and their relatives, but knew that at the end of the day they had to do what was going to be best for their families. So love for families, love for the community. After the war, a lot of these organizations that were created, including Nisei Week and even Asian basketball, were created because to keep the community together. And so when I look at, you know, I think the story that kind of sticks is why I say love is because when my grandpa was passing away, he looked at my grandma, and my grandma was like, "It's okay, Jim, like you can go, like, you know, don't suffer anymore." And he looked at her and he said, "But what about you? Who's going to take care of you?" And really, they're like veterans. That's always what they had in mind. You know, how am I best take care of my family? How am I best create a place in America for my grandchildren and my great grandchildren? And to me, I think that their story reminds me about love and compassion for people in my family, my community, and those that I might not know or yet or ever.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, it's really what Emiko, your fellow torchbearer, said about how they fought for those that they loved and those that they would never know, you know. And I spent some time recently in Hawaii with one of the veterans, Shinye Gima. He's with the MIS, and what he talked about, and this is the gift I think he gave me, was he said, you know, so many people today in America, we talk about our rights. I have the right to do this, I have the right to do that. And he said, that's not what got the 100th and the 442nd through World War II. It's not what got the MIS through World War II. It was a sense of obligation to others, obligation to those that were on the battlefield with you, obligation to your family that was back stateside, whether in Hawaii or whether in a camp on the mainland. And I think that's what you're talking about, Lindsay. And I love that you use the word love, you know, that obligation to others is just another way of saying love, and how your grandfather to his dying day took care of your grandmother, you know. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. How would you describe this story to non-Japanese Americans? You know, I mean, here we are, we're all Japanese American. I'm assuming that many of the folks on the audience will be Japanese American, so we kind of instinctively understand the story. But how would you describe the significance of this story to people who are not in our community?
Okay, Mitch.
Go, Gene.
Yeah, I think I would start with the camps. I think it has to start from the camp experience and what happened to us back in the 40s, and as far as rounding us up and sending us to the concentration camps. I think that's where the story starts. And then from there, how it evolves, you know, how the war evolved through that, and how the men, the Japanese American men in those camps actually volunteered to fight for the country who actually imprisoned them. That's how I would start that story.
That's
Okay, and
interesting.
I'm gonna challenge you just for a moment, Gene. I would say that is such a mainland perspective. You are so katong, bra. You know, but you know, but truly, there is the mainland experience, and then there is the Hawaii experience, and I always say that they are different sides of the same coin. But I mean, you know, truly the Hawaii experience is a little bit different than the mainland experience. But it does come down to young men, you know, volunteering and putting themselves in harm's way. Yeah. Helen, were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say, I think any approach is a good one when you can share the story. So no matter how you share it, it's always good to share it. But I was going to say almost the opposite of what Jean was saying. I think what I would do is maybe share a story, of maybe pick one or two stories of something that I'm familiar with, of the veterans and their experience. And then I would broaden it out to say, so imagine you're this young man in the US Army, you're on the battlefield, or you're in Japan and you're interrogating, these prisoners of war. And you're a hero. You sacrifice. Some have sacrificed their lives. Some come back and to tell their story. All the while, their families are behind barbed wire. Sort of to say that, we are all Americans, but there's a group of Americans who suffered a horrific experience of camp. I'm sure in Hawaii, and I have to say, I'm not familiar with the Hawaii story as much, but I'm sure that there were men who probably wanted to enlist and maybe were turned away because they were because of their race, because of what they look like. And I think I would love to tell the story from just the actual experience and then saying, but this is where they came from. Can you imagine today this happening to you? What would you do? I don't know if I would have made that same decision.
Yeah, that really is $1 million question that a lot of people struggle with. Would I have volunteered at that particular time? And let me share with the panelists, one of our viewers just wrote in saying, hey, remember, not all of the men who went and fought on the mainland were in camps. And as we know that there were not many, but there were Japanese American families that lived east of the exclusion zone in Wyoming, in this particular viewer's case, or in Colorado, where Governor Carr welcomed so many Japanese Americans, and yet they still also volunteered or were drafted into service. I just was in Denver, Colorado, where the grand niece of Joe Sakato, who was from Colorado and went on and earned the Medal of Honor, came out of Colorado. So great stories, again, from the mainland, whether they were in camp or whether they were not in camp, because they were east of the exclusion zone.
But perhaps that comes back to the obligation to the community, whether or not your family was affected or not. You were going to go fight for those people that were in those camps, and because you look like them and you're likely to be treated the same way. And maybe that's the Nihonjin side of us that we bring back, the not bringing shame, having the obligation to serve our community as the Japanese and Japanese American family.
Right. So Derek, let me put you on the spot. Have you thought about whether you would have gone, whether you would have served under those conditions?
No, honestly, I haven't thought of that, because I've been so privileged, because, that generation already made that sacrifice. But I mean, yeah, I would, Mitch. Put me on the spot.
Okay. Well, I'll put Lindsay on the spot. Lindsay,
I'll sign up.
Have you
Sign me up.
As you've talked about your identity, you've talked about your grandfather. Did the thought ever cross your mind, what would I have done?
If it were now, and like Derek had said, our grandparents had already fought, our grandpas had already fought for this country. I can't help but be cynical, and I probably wouldn't. Like, part of what makes me so I think proud to be a Japanese American is knowing how their sacrifices impacted us and impacted other minority communities. I think about 9/11, and I think about the Muslim American community and the talks of putting these Muslim Americans in camps like the internment camps, and it was a flashback to World War II. And so if this were to happen again, I don't think I'd be as optimistic, unfortunately, as the greatest generation in my perspective ever lived. So
they set the bar pretty high for us, didn't they? One last question, Makoto, before you interrupt me. So, Jean, I would bet dollars to sushi that you have thought about whether or not you would have gone, because that's our generation, right? That we looked at our fathers and we said, wow, they went, you know, whether they were volunteers or whether they just went along with the draft, the vast majority of them, and I don't want to discount those that resisted and, you know, the Fair Play Committee at Heart Mountain, but the vast majority went. I'm sure you thought about it as to what you would have done.
Oh, absolutely, Mitch. I thought, you know, I think about it all the time. What would I have done? And, you know, I think I think what would have happened, my dad would have made me go. Because my dad was very patriotic. He was a Korean War vet. You know, he did all those things. So I think the family would have talked me into going.
Yeah. Makoto, I know we're over time. I just want to say thank you to our 4 panelists. I love the conversation. I know we could get even deeper on it. And sometime in the future, I want to have the 5 of us get together over dinner and we'll just go even deeper together.
As long as you cook.
Oh, no, I'll pay, but I'm not going to cook.
And actually, Mitch, it does look like we have some questions for the panelists. If we can entertain maybe 1 or 2 of those.
Go for it, Makoto.
So I know the legacy of the World War II veterans, the Nisei veterans, has really grown over the course of the last maybe 80 or so years. But the legacy will continue. So for each of the panelists, someone's asking, what advice would you give to younger generations to really understand and empathize with their experience? And then how will you carry on the legacy, or how will you help the next generation carry on the legacy? And kind of that's for everybody.
Well, there's been so many, you know, documentaries, and with the internet, there's so much material and interviews that have been conducted. You know, if they're interested in learning more about that era, I don't think there's ever been a time where there's been more information available to them. So yeah, dive in.
Yeah. Hey, Makoto, you know, to me, it's continue to tell the story. You know, it's all about telling the story to the next generation. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, my parents didn't tell the story until it was pretty late for me. But I think we have the responsibility to continue the story and use organizations like Go for Broke National Education Center to help you tell that story, because there's a lot of archives, a lot of videos and things that they have that makes learning more interesting for the next generation. So that's what we have to do. We have to continue to tell the story.
I think I kind of go back to what I said earlier about really understanding that each individual, each person that fought in the war, that served, that, you know, their story is not a general story. And if there's any way that we can all sort of delve a little bit deeper into who that person is and their history, go really beyond that to truly understand their perspective, and have that understanding, I think that kind of sort of provides the empathy or the connection that we all have as human beings. And, you know, again, it's sort of avoiding generalization, but also really understanding, you know, what brought them to this point and what brings them forward to continue. And I think that's an interesting point to also share with the next generation. I think that's something, again, to connect everybody.
And yeah, going off what Helen said about like the individual stories, I mean, there's Go for Broke has a ton of videos on their website. And the Go for Broke, like Portraits of Courage, that book where they go through each individual story and their background and why they, you know, decided to serve, and then what happened with them after the war. I think that creates kind of a connection that they might not be able to experience face to face as the veterans pass on. But I think it's a two-pronged kind of approach. It'd be, you know, us continuing to tell the story and to anybody that will listen, and on the other side, the younger generations is the willingness to learn and educate and you know, understand like who these people are and why they did the American society.
Makoto, if I can add my 2 cents just
Definitely.
very quickly, you know, in my position at Go for Broke National Education Center, I think along with telling the story, what we've learned to do is listen to the reaction of young people to the story and to listen to them as to what about the story is important and to emphasize that and help them to make this story relevant in their current life. And it's not always an easy thing for us to do, but it's been what's made us effective in creating a cadre of torchbearers, not only in Los Angeles, but getting young people in Denver and in Honolulu and Maui to be interested once again in the story.
Definitely. Thank you for that, Mitch. And I think for us, in light of Veterans Day very quickly approaching, what can we, this is a question for you, Mitch, what can we as a community do to, better carry on the legacy of the Nisei veteran story and kind of just keeping that in mind moving forward?
Make a donation to Go for Broke National Education Center. And I'm joking, but find your own way and find a way that resonates with the young generations in your family to think about what veterans of all of our conflicts, but in particular our Nisei veterans of World War II have done. One example is last Saturday, we at Go for Broke National Education Center went to Evergreen Cemetery and did a cleanup. Lindsay was a part of that, and we invited the Nikkei Student Union from San Luis Obispo to come down and help us. And those kids came down, didn't know a lot about the story, but learned and engaged with it and felt like they were giving back to the community. So I guess finding a way to connect with the story on this particular Veterans Day, to remember and to be grateful, because Okage-sama Day, as Lindsay said, because of them, we are.
Can I just add that, Mitch, you should not be joking. We should be supporting organizations like Go for Broke, in the way of a donation. I think it's so important. I learned this from Jean Kanamori, that we really, as individuals in this community, it's our responsibility to ensure that these organizations are here for many generations to come. And we can only do that if we donate. And I always say, it doesn't matter if it's $5 or $5 million. If I had $5 million, I would spread the joy, but I don't. But I think it's so important that we support organizations like Go for Broke and make sure that these stories are shared for the next generation, because we can't do that if the organization is no longer there.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And again, I want to send very gracious and very thankful words to all of our panelists for today and for all of you in attendance today. Just want to say thank you so much. We appreciate all of your time. Mitch, I do want to give you the opportunity to share about a couple of other upcoming things that Go for Broke has with a couple of slides here.
Thank you, Makoto. And just very quickly, thank you everyone for joining us. And yes, we do have 2 big events coming up this week. On Thursday, we have partnered with the History Channel. We were the producing consultants on a documentary, 1-hour documentary called Hidden Heroes, the Nisei Soldiers of World War II. As you can see from the slide, it premieres this Thursday at 8 p.m. Pacific time. So please look for the History Channel at that time. I hope you enjoy the documentary. I think it will spread this story to literally millions of people who have not heard the story across the nation as well as across the world. And secondly, this Saturday is our 20th annual Evening of Aloha virtual gala. Again, we are gathering virtually because it's too early to have in-person events yet. But you can watch it at 4 p.m. on YouTube, Facebook, or by going to our website, goforbroke.org. And it's an hour long, and we'll be telling some wonderful stories about some of the work we've been doing across the nation. So I hope to see you on Saturday.
Great, thanks so much, Mitch. And just in closing from us on the Cato side, I do want to share our upcoming December speaker series. So just very similar to tonight's presentation, we are doing December version of this, welcoming Roxana Tsukamoto Lewis. She'll be our next speaker series person we're inviting to speak for us. She's a certified travel counselor, and actually registration for this event is going to be open on our website. The title of the presentation will be The Road Yet Taken, where Roxana is going to be looking at how travel can be disrupting to the aging process, and while also providing some insight on what travel in a post-pandemic world may look like. So again, please visit our website. It'll be Wednesday, December 15th at 5:30 p.m. Lastly, in closing, I do want to say, again, thank you so much to our panelists for today. Thank you, Mitch, for moderating. And thank you to Go for Broke National Education Center for the partnership in all of this. I do want to also announce that in association with today's presentation, we are going to be sending out an evaluation. And alongside the evaluation, there is going to be an opportunity drawing opportunity for you. So if you submit some feedback in the evaluation, you'll be entered into this drawing where we have partnered with Go for Broke to provide a giveaway to our community. At Cato, we're also committed to enhancing the quality of senior life in our community, and Cato programs are provided to the community as a resource, but very much like what Helen said, what Mitch said, we do rely on the support of the community to continue to provide these resources. We hope that if the presentation today was helpful to you or it did make an impact on your life, that you would consider supporting us through either filling out the evaluation, like I mentioned, or by giving a gift to Cato as well. So we look forward to being able to provide these types of programs in the future, and we hope to collaborate with organizations like Go for Broke in the future as well. So we just want to say thank you all so much for attending. Again, thank you so much to our panelists, and we hope that you all have a good night.